everybody. It is January 17th. I am Tracy Defoe from Kata School Cascadia, and this is the first half of our Kata community Zooms. So thank you for coming, everybody. Nice to see some old friends and a couple new faces. That's always great. So at the end of last week, Mark and I decided we would try a topic. And the topic for today is the experimenting record. And our discussion about it even prompted Mark to put all his thoughts into a blog post on his theleanthinker.com blog. So I know some of you have read it, and I'm sure we have lots to talk about in terms of the experimenting record, what it is, what it isn't, and how to use it, and maybe how it works as a foundational part of the practice of Kata for the learner and the coach. So I've teed it up there for you, Mark, and I think you should take it away first.
I will.
If you have thoughts or comments, put them in the chat right as Mark talks, or raise your hand, of course, and I will call on you live, and you will be in the recording that way.
All right. So this is the experimenting record. This is mine, but they all look basically the same. And it goes beyond an action item log because it builds the thinking pattern for problem solving into the structure of the form itself. Everything on here is something that a seasoned coach is going to ask a problem solver or an improver about, no matter what form is being used, no matter what the conversation is. But what this does is it gives us that structure overtly, which makes it easier for the coach to remember what to ask about and easier for the learner to prepare. Let's just kind of go through what the blocks are about. And this is not the coaching questions. These are more of the generic kinds of questions. So like the obstacle being addressed, this is within the Toyota Kata structure. What problem are you actually trying to solve is something we tend to bleep over. And so I think it's very important that we actually fill that out. And then what does solved look like? What are we measuring? What measurement are we striving for? I'd kind of like to see that maybe on here, but as a minimum, what are we measuring to know whether we have solved the problem or not? How will you know you've solved the problem? Those are the kinds of things that either are here and or on the obstacle parking lot where we've got a column for that we could use. Now, let's look at the next line. An experiment or step has an explicit purpose. It is to test an idea or a countermeasure, or to get more information about what is actually happening. And I've kind of lumped two of the three experiments into that second one. This means that every step has a learning objective of some kind. Sometimes it helps to have the learner think about the learning objective or the objective of the experiment first. And the reason is that our action item mindset tends to lead us to it's what I'm going to do. Well, what do you expect from doing that? And then they try to think, well, if I did that, what would happen? And we want to reverse that thinking. What do we want to achieve? And what are we going to do to achieve it? We want to establish a cause and effect relationship between box 1 and box 2. If I do this, then I expect to learn this. And that cause and effect relationship is something that's embedded throughout the Toyota Kata structure. And ultimately, that is what we want our learners to learn, is to think about everything they see in terms of, if this happens, then what? What should be happening? What is actually happening? Why is there a difference? Cause and effect. Ultimately, that's what we're teaching them. When the experiment's done, what did you actually do? And what outcome did you actually get? This is another one where learners will trip you up, where they'll just copy what's in box 1 and put it in past tense. I was going to have a meeting with Jane. I had a meeting with Jane. Okay, what did you say in the meeting? How did it go? How did she respond? And did you get the decision you needed? For example, on a hypothetical. So I would like to see a little more detail in here. And this block is basically objective to the point that if two people perform the identical experiment, they should generally report the same things in this box. These are things that are observed, things that are seen, things that are heard, things that are measured. Okay, then what did you learn? Things typically that we learn about obstacles. We add new obstacles. We delete obstacles that we learned aren't obstacles, or we end up editing obstacles we have because we learn more about them. That's a primary thing, and I'd love to do is make sure the learner, as part of closing out an experimenting cycle, scrubs the obstacle list and make sure it gets updated to what is currently understood to be the obstacles. Do we have new cause and effect relationships within the process that we at least not maybe knew, but newly understood? What do we understand better than we understood before? For example, if I'm running a hypothesis test where I'm going to make an intervention or a change to the process, and I expect it to drive the cycle time down by 3 seconds, then what actually happened and what did you learn about cycle time? That's the kind of thing we want to go a little deeper here than just the superficial. This block is more subjective because different learners may learn different things depending on their backgrounds and their biases. I would expect somebody who's a seasoned lean person to learn different things than somebody who's making their first or second pass, for example, in traditional Kaizen. Then finally, based on what I learned here, my next step or experiment will be, and we want each line to be informed by the previous. So these are not independent things. Even if I'm starting a new form with a new obstacle, based on what I learned, I've eliminated an obstacle. I'm going to have new obstacles. So now what do I need to learn about next? And what am I going to do to learn about it? So that's a real quick 5-minute tour through the experimenting record, and hopefully it prompted some questions or thoughts or comments or experiences that are different from mine, which certainly happens.
You can raise your hand or I will just call on you. I have to say, Matt, you look so intense during that lesson that I'm sure you have either a question or a
Oh,
comment.
I 100% do. You know me. I eat this up. Yeah, actually, it was all the way back at the beginning. The Because it just felt one this week. You said it perfectly when you asked them, "Hey, what's your experiment?" And then, "What do you expect to happen?" 100% of the time, in my observations, usually that makes someone go back in a loop to edit the experiment because when you ask them, "What are you going to learn?" They're like, "Oh, you're right. Maybe I need to tweak it." Or I've had them completely eliminate the experiment because that wasn't actually something was an obstacle. So I love the switch of maybe start with the what are we trying to learn first, and then what would be an experiment that would help us learn that. That's a cool tip. So I appreciate that.
That's a Mark classic, but it never fails to bang. It was great.
I'm wondering, is there value in what you talked about, Matt, that struggle between coming up with your next step and then going to the learning? Is there value in that, or should we explore setting out with a different order?
Great question. They say the best learning comes in the struggle, but I'll let others speak in as they want. Yeah.
I'll use that when I've seen the learner struggle with it. So it's not a default because the beauty of it is I can test their thinking just by having them do it straight out of the box. And then I will learn. I will see that they're struggling to connect, or that they're really what will happen is, well, I'm going to do this, or what do you expect to happen? And I'll hear which really means I haven't thought about that. Or I'll see a repeat of the action in the expected outcome. I expect to have a meeting with Jane. Okay. Well, let's go back. What are you trying to achieve there? What do you need to get out of that meeting? What do you need to know about this idea? Why are you trying to rearrange the layout? What's the purpose of that? Well, I should make a U-shaped work cell, but why? Starting to get them to think about the objective. Okay, now I need to save 3 seconds of cycle time. Okay, what are you going to do in order to do that? And why do you think that's going to work? So it invites a conversation.
I like that response, Mark, and not to take up more airtime, but from Tracy and Tilo, the dojo learning that I had, I think, Mark, the way you approached it is part of the coaching is to like learn where they're at. And there's a difference between coaching, teaching, and telling, right? And so if I let them go through it, I hope they thought about the logic of what they're going to learn in the experiment. So part of the experiment is let them tell me live, And then Mark, to your point, then I realized, do I have to coach them? Do I have to teach them and kind of bring them back and then adapt? So maybe, Lacey, that's a way to see where they're at, get your reference, and then you adapt. I think that's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
I know this is working when I see the block on the experimenting record is scribbled out and we've rewritten it on the next line down. That happens all the time, especially in the beginning, and it's awesome.
Seems like a more seasoned improver or learner would by rote get used to that and get better at identifying the next step and what you're going to learn.
Mhm.
But okay to fail at that and try again because that's why we have a coach. So yeah, thank you.
And the other piece here is the coach has to learn this too, especially a new coach, because they often will just buy the basic story, buy the BS that's written on there. And so I want to teach the coaches about this relationship of what makes a good experiment and that cause and effect relationship.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please, Lou. Go ahead.
I love the experimenting record, and I think it took a number of you to get through my thick skull the applicability of this. But when I can remember to use it, it gets used everywhere. And I can't, it seems to me like someone, I think it was you, Mark, talked about this being the heart of it all. And when I've used it, if there's been any cadence to it, there's a team that I meet with every week, an informal team, and we meet virtually. And I was at another meeting with a member of that team, and he brought up the experimenting record and how it's just become a part of, he didn't call it the experimenting record. He just said, here's what we do. And every time I'm looking at something, what am I trying to achieve? What's the next thing I'm going to try? What do I think will happen? What actually happened? And so it seems to me that it doesn't take a whole lot for people to adopt it and lean fully into it and start using it everywhere.
And Herr Doctor, this is what you do professionally. You schedule a diagnostic test of some kind in order to learn. You apply an intervention or a medication and you expect something to happen. And if it doesn't, that's funny. What have I learned? So everything you do is there to get more information about the patient's condition. So it's the same thinking. This is your chart.
Yeah, my sense is it's the same thinking everywhere. I mean, it's just life, right? Where are we trying to go? What's the next thing we're going to try to do to get there? What do we think will happen? We may not do it formally, but it's moving life forward.
For those who don't know him, Lou is an MD. That's why I use that.
Yes, I was going to mention it or put it in the chat. Yeah, because don't worry, Mark's not going to call you Air Doctor. Okay.
Herr Doctor.
Herr Doctor.
Herr Doctor.
Yes, I know in German.
Auf Deutsch.
I wanted to mention the value of having the person fill it all out, even if we are going to erase it and even if they know. So like a new person. So I have a couple of new people I'm coaching right now. And once you've had a coaching cycle with them, and they have actually either retyped on the mural or erased or crossed out, then often the next time they won't fill it in because they think, look, you're just going to coach me and we're going to write something different. But I always tell them, I really want you to fill it out because I really want to know what you think is your next step. And I've never actually told anyone, I'm poking you to see what your cause and effect understanding is. But Mark, you actually said, ultimately, that's what we are teaching to cause and effect, basically to pay attention or notice cause and effect and set things up for cause and effect. So even though I beat my head on my desk, if someone says, my next step is to have a meeting with Mark, what do you expect? I expect to meet with Mark at 9:30 tomorrow and talk about this obstacle. What actually happened? I met with Mark, or I didn't meet with Mark because he was busy. What did you learn? Oh, I learned that wasn't a good time to meet with Mark. Like, this is not why I get out of bed in the morning. It drives me crazy. But I need them to put that down so that I can develop it with them through question. And so I think it's really important to not think that because your coach made you rewrite it, you did it wrong or something. It just shows where you are in understanding what we're using this thing for and how to use it fully.
And I want to chime in on that because I worked with a pretty large company and I was teaching Kata, but they had a corporate CI office that was pushing it, but their process was insanely more complicated, and their coaching process deliberately had the learner filling that record out during the coaching cycle. So it took forever because they were afraid to allow the learner to get it wrong. And what that did, of course, was it turns into, okay, coach, just tell me what to write here. And the coach does all the thinking for them, which was the bias in this company because that's just the way their CI people were trained. So CI folks, you've got to let go of that. And you have to allow the learner to put down stuff that isn't quite there because your job is to learn what they're thinking.
And they have to be safe. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
They have to be safe. There can't be a big risk in saying, oh, I think this is what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Don't make them wrong. Just ask them for more information.
Right. Jeff, did
If
you
you-
want to chime in?
Yeah, I years ago, to get a lesson from Mike is basically a good coach. He'll let his learner step in a rabbit hole and stumble some, but won't let him walk off the cliff.
Yeah.
To get to your point, Tracy, of they got to be safe, but they got to learn from the issues, and so you don't predict and prevent them from making some of the wrong moves. They got to learn that themselves for clarity and for completeness.
And the wrong move might be trying a step that you're pretty sure isn't going to give them what they want to learn, but they should learn that, right? Yeah. How I handle
But
my
it's
clients.
interesting the number of times as a coach, I have experienced just the opposite. I was convinced this was going to fall flat on its face. And oh my God, it worked.
Yeah.
And so then I started asking a whole lot of questions because I've got to understand why it worked to make sure they understand why it worked.
Right. Super. I also just thought I'd mention that last week when I announced this topic, I put the copy I use of the experimenting record in the email. And after I clipped it in, I realized that long ago, I renamed it the learning record when I work with my clients. And Mark, I see you alluded to that in yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I may rename mine.
Yeah. Well, Mike called
I'm
it,
due for a version 5. So
it used to be PDCA cycle record. And we stopped using that because too many lean people immediately thought they knew what they were doing. And it was what they already knew. And it was pattern recognition problem, right? Oh, seen it. Don't have to pay attention to it. This won't bite me. And then experimenting record. And then because I mostly come from a learning lens, but also I really emphasize the learning part, I decided to call it the learning record. Like we're just documenting what we're doing and what we're learning from it. But I don't think that's very common practice. So if you go and get the templates from somewhere, they're not going to say that. They're probably going to say experimenting record. Okay. So anybody else want to talk about their experience with the PDCA record, experimenting record, or perhaps your experience as a learner faced with those blank boxes to fill in?
So for me as a learner, as I got pushed on what did you learn and nudged further and further, man, did it open things up. Things that I would have never seen. So Mark, I remember as you were working with me a while back, you kept pushing, and man, it just blew open the learning and in multiple ways. So
one thing I've noticed is, again, newer learners, people who are newer as improvers, they're really challenged by how little space they have. And so you'll get people writing over 2 or 3 lines, all this stuff, which then we edit back. And so I do think there's a discipline by having to be precise enough to get it into there and think through what you're going to do enough so that it fits. A lot of times people now are working on those on Miro or Mural on one of those digital boards where it's kind of easy to take lots of room. I remember this one learner, and I know Maria will probably know who I'm thinking about, who used to write like essays of what happened. And it took a long time to get her to see that I only need to know the part that's about what you said your step was. I don't need to know everything else. Yeah.
the thing on the mural is the type just keeps getting smaller as you add more words.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but we can zoom right in there, so that's okay. Yeah, but I do think it's a good discipline to come up with how to do that. Okay, does anybody have anything other than experimenting record they wanted to talk to on this call?
The only thing I might say, Tracy, I may have said this on some other calls, but there's some new folks that I haven't met before. So I'm coming into a new company, and this may happen with people you're coaching. Sometimes I'm walking into some process tools they already have set up. So a good example is I'd love to just like say, hey, use this new experimenting learning record. Here's a new format, new thing. But they already have versions of like some action plan or something already set out there. And what I've often done as a way to kind of dabble my way, use Kata to do Kata, is just like add columns into it. So they have the what am I doing by when, and I add what are you going to expect and what do you learn, and I'm going to weave into your tool and force you to get into the structure, and then eventually it turns into an experimenting record, what used to be an action plan. So there's sort of this backdoor approach that I've been experimenting with, which is for folks who might have a little more resistance to like a whole new approach, has been a thing that I've been dabbling with. So just wanted to offer that.
And do you have a conversation with them too, or they're just writing it down?
I do have a conversation, and some got to that really tactical meeting one. Like a guy wrote, "Hey, I emailed this lady and I asked her for some data." And then I was like, "What happened?" He's like, "I haven't heard back from her." I was like, "Oh, what do you do next?" He's like, "I'm going to wait." And I was like, "I just had 2 meetings with her since you met with her. Maybe I'll just ask her to read your email." And he was like, "Great." I was like, "All right, that's why we keep meeting." So like, and that helped, because sometimes it was cultural norms of, "Oh, I didn't know I could, I'm a director, you're a manager, I didn't know I could ask for this." And so some of this is also learning that, and not everybody is us. Like I can email people and they respond pretty quickly, but not everybody might have that power. So it was learning cultural norms existed, and he was afraid of asking for power. So I learned that about somebody. So I think this is so yes, Tracy, the coaching helped us to like use it and find benefit.
And always be quick, right? Don't wait.
That brings up a good point, because if you start with the experimenting record, which is really, if you look at the entire improvement kata, all the artifacts, this is where the scientific thinking or the problem solving thinking actually happens. It's in the experimenting record, and everything else on the board is there to set up a good experiment. So we have enough information. So if I just start with this, just with those little interventions that you're talking about, Matt, well, wait a minute, what problem are we actually trying to solve? And we can back up with interventions and end up constructing the need to have a good obstacle, to have a good way to measure it, to have it tied to a higher level objective. Where are we actually trying to achieve here? To have that tied to an even higher level objective. Hey, here's the challenge. When we teach classes, the experimenting record is just about the last thing we do, because we go through the steps of grasping the current condition and then establishing a target condition and then designing that experiment. But in organic practice, if you just start by applying the thinking pattern to anything, you'll end up having to fill in all the other boxes.
That's really cool, because then you can add those in as you go and you identify each piece. And then before you know it, I think Tracy did this once before with something she was demonstrating. Before you know it, you've taught a learner how to construct a whole storyboard by adding one piece after another, and without actually saying we're going to make a storyboard. It's like, oh, this would be a good box to put here.
Yeah. All this, let's put your run chart right here in the middle. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've done that before. Like someone has like a whiteboard or a cork board, and we're doing current condition stuff. And I'm just like, I just put it right in the middle, and nobody ever thinks that later on is because we're going to put the other ones on the other side, but that it works.
Or I can just use this one artifact to help them use whatever system they're using better, and to help them coach it better by forcing that thinking about cause and effect into everything.
Well, Mark, you got the last word. I'm going to stop the recording now for the first half call and welcome everybody to the coaching recording. And if you are leaving us now, thank you for joining us. And if like Jennifer, in her new University of Utah mom shirt, has just joined us, we'd be happy to recap.